Welcome to the Sky Therapeutics podcast. I'm your host, Tara Torres, a clinical nutritionist, researcher, educator, and consultant specializing in areas of weight loss, autoimmune disease, gastrointestinal disorders, metabolic syndrome, and other obesity-related conditions. I help clients improve their health through proper functional nutrition, professional-grade supplement protocols, exercise recommendations, education, and support using a personalized, evidence-based approach. At Sky Therapeutics, we offer functional nutrition solutions for chronic disease and help our clients develop sustainable lifestyle habits that will last a lifetime. As a friendly reminder, the information and opinions provided here today is to be taken as general information only, and you should always contact your personal physician or other qualified healthcare professional if you have any questions about your personal health and wellness. Hi, everyone. Thanks for listening. This week, we're going to be discussing all things acne and nutrition. This stems from my own personal struggles with acne. I was a young person who took Accutane, which is a prescription medication, a very strong, potent prescription medication for acne. This is something that I struggled with all through my teenage years into my early 20s and a little bit after that as well. And I really wanted to dive into the root cause of acne and understanding the difference between, things that we eat, the role of gut health, the role of hormones, stress, and all of those things in acne as a way to treat it, in addition to or in lieu of prescription medications. So in thinking of this week's topic, I thought it was only fitting to bring on Shannon Jones, who I met when I was doing my master's degree at the University of Western States. We worked together on several school projects and a couple professional projects after graduating, and I just highly value her education and her expertise. So Shannon has more than 20 years of experience specializing in skincare. In her Midtown Manhattan office, she offers advanced aesthetic treatments to address both anti-aging and acne, as well as nutritional counseling. She also does training, mentorship, and apprenticeship opportunities for licensed professionals. Shannon received her undergraduate degrees from University of Georgia in both finance and French. She then completed her aesthetics license in Georgia at the Atlanta Institute of Aesthetics in 2006. She also obtained a Master's of Science from the University of Western States in Human Nutrition and Functional Medicine in 2022, where she focused on atopic dermatitis and the gut-skin connection. Shannon has worked in all aspects of the beauty industry, including with dermatologists and plastic surgeons, as well as in high-end luxury spas. She was the lead esthetician and regional skincare trainer at Excel Spa in New York City, where she worked for 10 years. She left Excel to work with Georgia Louise in New York City and eventually left that position to return to graduate school in 2020. Shannon aims to help her clients address skin concerns stemming from nutritional deficiencies and digestive issues, as well as helping both solo estheticians and recent aesthetic graduates build successful businesses that they love. So without further ado, please stay tuned for our acne and nutrition talk with Shannon Jones. Hi, welcome to this week's podcast where we have my friend Shannon Jones joining us to talk about all things skin and diet and nutrition, supplements. I'm really excited to pick her brain because, as we mentioned in the intro, she's been doing this for 20 years, and we both met each other when we went to our master's program at the University of Western States. We both have a degree in human nutrition and functional medicine, and just through working with Shannon on different projects and through school and a couple things outside of school, actually, I've just grown to appreciate her knowledge and her expertise in this area. So, Shannon, we did a little brief introduction of you before we recorded this, but why don't you tell us a little more about yourself? Because I know you have your own business doing aesthetics and you've been doing this for a while now, and now you're teaching. So I'm just dying to hear what all you've been up to because it's been a while since we talked.
Yeah. Well, education's always been a foundation of everything that I've done. I love, even when I was working retail cosmetics at Sephora, I was always really big on educating people about ingredients and how they worked. And I sort of ended up developing a niche, partly because I was in the niche of allergic skin disease and how diet intersected. And I started really seeing how many of my clients were not responsive to just topical treatments. And then through my own journey of realizing that I was gluten intolerant and dealing with a lot of topical allergies and how reactive my skin was, I decided to go back and get a master's degree in nutrition and really start to make a more serious connection between how skin and nutrition fit together, aside from just what we hear in like popular culture about, eat healthy and your skin will look great, or drink more water and your skin will look great. I knew the relationship was much deeper than that. And then I started teaching. I'm actually teaching for a company that's an industry leader in a particular modality, dermaplaning. And I am also building out programs right now to teach estheticians not only about facials and skin and how to be better at their businesses, but also how to maybe act as that first layer of support. Dermatologists can be really inaccessible for a lot of people. And if estheticians who are more accessible can act as that first layer of defense for people when they have a real skin disease that needs to be referred out, to be a little bit better at filtering for that and be a little bit more hands-on in terms of helping their clients get better skin.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that's something that we understand from functional medicine is like a lot of times this stuff starts from inside, and it's amazing what we can do simply by controlling what, we're exposed to as far as like stress and how that impacts our gut. And then like the gut skin axis, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And in a customized approach, right? Like food allergies and food sensitivities are very different and unique for everybody. And so it's going to be interesting to kind of go down that rabbit hole and hear what you have to say about that and how that plays a role here.
Yeah.
When I was putting this together, it just kind of came up. I was remembering my own experiences with skin issues. And, my whole teenage and early 20s, I struggled with acne, and it seemed to get worse and worse and worse as I got older, to the point where I had cystic acne all over, like that, those pustules all over your cheeks. And like people look at me now and they would never know, and they would never guess that I struggled with that. But it was a big deal at the time. And I tried so many different antibiotics, like antibiotic after antibiotic, low dose, high dose, different types. Because you have to try so many before they give you the big guns, Accutane. And I tried birth controls, hormones to control it, And again, I think they were just trying to figure out what it was that was causing it, but unsuccessfully. Little did I know at the time, I actually had celiac disease, but I wasn't diagnosed with that until after I went through Accutane. So it's like, yeah, we have these genes for these things and what triggers them to become active. And I don't know, maybe I had it before this, but Accutane certainly made it worse. That was quite the experience. So, personally, I've struggled with my own issues with gut health and acne, but I also see a lot of clients with it too. So I thought this was just fitting to talk about. So Accutane is a prescription medication, also known as isotretinoin. It's a powerful, very powerful, strong medication primarily used to treat severe cases of acne that have not responded well to other treatments. So like I mentioned, I had to have failed a whole bunch of other stuff. It's
Actually, you'd be surprised at how quick some dermatologists will go for Accutane these days.
right, right. And it's
It's
mostly
actually,
for nodular.
yeah.
Yeah. So it's mostly for nodular or cystic acne, right? And sometimes I've heard of people taking it and they don't have that severe case of acne, when really it should be a last resort when you failed other things, topicals, antibiotics, hormone therapies, etc. Um, so my understanding of Accutane is that it works by reducing the size and the activity of the sebaceous oil glands in the skin, which can lead to a significant reduction in acne lesions. It also has anti-inflammatory properties, but it is got some serious potential, serious side effects. So it's only to be done under careful supervision of a healthcare provider. I remember getting lab work done every single month. I had to sign forms every single month saying that, I was a teenager at the time. I wasn't sexually active. But for adults, you have to use 2 forms of birth control. You have to have a pregnancy test if you're a female every single month, along with blood work to monitor liver enzymes and things like that. Um, but common side effects include dry skin, which I think you're going to talk to us about why, and then lips, eyes, as well as potentially joint and muscle pain. There's also gastrointestinal undesired effects. So, patients have to be closely monitored. And the reason why birth control and protection is such a big deal is because of the risk of side effects in pregnancy. A typical course of Accutane can last several months. And it really just kind of depends on how you respond, how long you're going to be on that. I know I was on it for like 6 or 7 months and we discontinued it because of my side effects. Um, so what is your experience with Accutane and knowledge about it?
Well, I've had a lot of patients or clients who have been on Accutane in the past, and I'm often honestly surprised at how quickly derms will now go to Accutane before they'll try other things. Because a lot of times, and I'm obviously painting with a very broad brush here, but derms will often, they're not going to look at the underlying nutrition here. There's not a lot of derms who are considering microbiome health or food sensitivities and things like that. And I find that the side effects are often, it's not just dry skin, it's painful dry skin. And what you're essentially doing is you're creating an environment where the skin can't heal because it doesn't even have that protective barrier on it any longer. And it needs that. So you have an acid mantle on the skin, or the lipid layer on the skin, which is a layer of sweat and oil that's supposed to lay on the surface of the skin and protect it. And when that is depleted, the skin is essentially just exposed to the elements. And if you don't have that layer, that lipid layer on the surface of the skin, your skin cannot heal itself. So the net result is actually an inflammatory response.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this happens also with a lot of other skin conditions. This happens in psoriasis, this happens in eczema, where your skin is essentially flaking in order to create a protective barrier to shield itself from the outside environment. So to me, it's almost like the side effects of the Accutane are negating the benefits, which is creating an environment for the skin to heal.
Right. And the overall health of the skin. And I think we see that with just like over cleansing and stuff too. People talk about like not disrupting the lipid barrier too much. Like, yes, we want to treat it and we want to clean it, but too much can be detrimental, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the acne treatments that people will try before they go to Accutane are often very drying and can really disrupt the lipid layer as well. Now, the other thing to remember too is that Accutane, it does work by reducing the oil activity, the sebaceous activity. And the problem is that so many people don't have an oily skin issue. So especially for women, I generally find that the acne is caused more by like hormonal responses that are causing a increase in inflammation. And when you add Accutane on that, I think a lot of times it's really just, I mean, again, I've seen people be successful on it and have great results, and then I've seen other people fail on it. So I tend to see, as a facialist, I tend to see people who have failed on it more than anything. So it's hard for me to speak to the people who are successful on it, just because people, usually the facial is the last resort, like they're coming to me because like my dermatologist isn't helping me. I can't get a hold of him. And they end up coming to me for that, the facial. So I'm kind of having to clean up everything that's left over and figure out what's going on. Where I would rather see something like a nutritional intervention earlier in the process, because if you can uncover that food sensitivity, a lot of times it's dairy, a lot of times it's sugar, it's the glycemic response, and you can quell that hormonal response, which is something that Accutane won't do, then you don't have to go through those extra drying side effects that are ultimately inflammatory.
Right. Again, I think addressing the underlying root cause, which is going to be very different for different people, right? For some people, it could be hormonal, and for other people, it could be a gut thing. For some people, it could be stress impacting their gut and their hormones. Like it's all about kind of taking a step back to really find out where this all started and how that domino effect happens. So let's talk about diet and the role of like the gut skin axis, because I feel like this is kind of controversial. Like I feel like in the past people have talked about like dairy intolerances and stuff like that, but there hasn't been any hard, scientific evidence to support that. So what's your take on that?
Well, there is evidence that supports it, but it's less about the dairy and more about the glycemic load of the foods. And a lot of it is because it's actually more metabolic than anything else. It's the triggering of an insulin resistance. So they're actually finding that if you can create a more insulin sensitive environment, that a lot of times acne will decrease. And sometimes you can do that. Dairy is absolutely, like milk specifically, is a higher glycemic load. Um, the other tricky thing about dairy that some people can be really reactive to is the actually the hormone nature. Not organic dairy, that doesn't make a difference. It's the fact that milk is designed to grow the baby calf. Like, it is designed to grow an animal. And it unfortunately triggers those same growth responses in us. And there's hormone receptors in the pore that can trigger that oil production. Essentially, is basically what it happens. It's actually an androgen production that can be triggered by dairy consumption. And it's, like I said, there's no one size fits all, but dairy is usually one of my first places to go, is to get people off of dairy and then heal the gut lining. Or next is sugar. Some people will have the same response to like a gluten intolerance. They'll have more of an acne response, but I usually find that that's a little bit further down the list. Um, as for the gut skin connection, there is a lot of emerging data right now on the skin microbiome and how it relates to the gut. So that's a really tricky thing it's hard to delve too deeply into right now, just because there is so much emerging data on how they crosstalk. But the essence of it is that you have the gut lining and the skin are made up of the same kinds of cells. So they seem to be particularly susceptible to the same sort of triggers. So a lot of times, if you're having something happen in your gut, you're going to have something also show up on your skin because of the similarity of the skin cells. And because of that axis, there's a lot of crosstalk.
Right. And I think we see that with the gut brain axis, and, inflammation in general can be systemic, starting with the gut. And when we're thinking about food allergies or food hypersensitivities, which are technically a subclass of food allergies, those create an inflammatory response, which can lead to dysbiosis or an imbalance in the gut microbiome, which again is going to relate to chronic low grade inflammation, not only in your gut, but it can become systemic, because inflammation in the gut is what's going to increase intestinal permeability. So usually we have really tight cell junctions in our gastrointestinal wall. And when inflammation is present, it's going to create these little holes that are going to allow proteins like food particles to leach through there. And that's where we see inflammation, increase food hypersensitivities. And then when the gut is inflamed, it can trigger that systemic inflammation, which will exacerbate skin inflammation and acne, right?
Absolutely. That's exactly what happens. And it happens in conditions outside of acne too. I mean, this is exactly what happens with psoriasis. This is exactly what happens with eczema. This is also what happens, honestly, with atopic dermatitis. Atopic dermatitis is when dermatitis shows up and we don't know where it's from. And a lot of times that is where a lot of these food sensitivities show up, is because you have that increased permeability, you get a higher level of reactivity, you have a skin that's basically already hot, and then you're throwing kerosene on a fire and it just flares everything up. This is one of the reasons why I wanted to integrate functional medicine into skincare, because if you can catch those skin responses, you can use it as a window to what's happening on the inside of the body.
Right. And I love that you mentioned that it's not just acne, right? It's psoriasis and eczema and things like that, which I think are probably more well talked and understood and understanding like the gut connection, food sensitivities. So it makes sense that it would impact acne, right? And being from the same skin barrier.
Yeah.
Um,
I think the tricky thing about acne though is that there's just so much it's it's been poorly studied for so long. Uh in fact, when I was reviewing some of my acne notes for this, and I was reminded, we used to always say, "Oh, it's chocolate," and eating chocolate will cause acne, and then they would debunk it, but they would always debunk it with so the study that linked chocolate or said that chocolate didn't cause acne, right? The study that did that actually was using a control with an inflammatory made out of like milk solids and an inflammatory oil. So they weren't actually controlling for what we think is the problem in the chocolate. So it's not necessarily the chocolate that's the problem. It was the fact that the chocolate is another high glycemic load food, the fact that it had the dairy in it that could trigger acne, that could also be a food sensitivity. And these studies were so poorly constructed for so long, for so many years, that we have we sort of like ran away from looking at food as a trigger for acne, when in actuality it was the fact that the studies were very poorly constructed and debunking that nutrition was a factor at all, when in actuality it was always the factor. They just weren't doing a good study on it. And I think that's one of the reasons, because we have much better studies for things like psoriasis, eczema, things like that.
yeah. How funny with the chocolate. Like, is it the sugar? Is it the dairy? Is it the carb processing? Like there's so many factors in there. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
also wrote down in my notes about hormonal balance. So we know that the gut can influence hormones through a lot of different mechanisms, and hormone imbalances, particularly elevated levels of androgens like testosterone, are linked with sebum production, which can contribute to acne. So gut bacteria can impact the metabolism of hormones and potentially affect these levels, right?
Yeah, and this is also where the dairy really comes into play, is because you've got the androgen levels, and then the dairy is essentially that milk product specifically, and it's specifically just milk. It's not necessarily true of like aged cheeses or yogurt or anything like that. A lot of those will tend to break down some of these factors that will contribute to acne, but it's the triggering of the androgen, because the pore that produces the sebum is particularly susceptible to that hormone. So that when you have an excess of that, the dairy can really trigger that inflammatory extra oil production response.
Interesting. Okay. So we also know that the gut plays a large role in managing our immune system and regulating that. And that in turn is going to also play a role in inflammation. Our gut's also going to be, our first line in breaking down and absorbing nutrients. So let's dive into nutrients, because obviously a healthy gut is important to get everything that we need, but some of the nutrients I came across in my notes were zinc, vitamin A, and vitamin E. But maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what we should be focusing on.
Well, I actually think that that's a great start. Zinc is integral in healing the skin, whether you're healing the skin from acne or healing the skin from eczema or rosacea or anything like that. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I am a huge advocate for mineral sunscreens,
Mm,
which is another thing I saw in your notes about sunscreens and things like that. But zinc sunscreens can be really, really helpful, because they are tougher to formulate and therefore tougher to wear, especially for darker skin tones, but they have an anti-inflammatory component built in. So if you're sensitive or reactive or prone to acne, a zinc sunscreen can be really helpful because it's going to also support the healing of the skin. Vitamin A, we actually already talked about vitamin A because we talked about vitamin A in terms of Accutane.
Uh-huh.
I just don't think it needs to necessarily be to that level of vitamin A. I think a healthy dose of vitamin A is integral for skin health in general. In fact, I talk about this a lot on my Instagram. So anybody who wants to go back through my Instagram, I'm always talking about retinoids, but this is one of the reasons why a retinol or like a tret cream, a tretinoin cream, which is a different form of vitamin A, is a very it's usually the first place that people will go if they're going to their dermatologist to get a script. They're going to get a topical vitamin A. And I think internally it's just as important. In fact, I think in a lot of times, I think the vitamin A might be more important. Vitamin E is integral in terms of rebuilding the cell wall and making the cell more protective of the inner parts of the cell. So the inner workings of the cell are protected if you have that healthy cell wall. This is one of the reasons why we moisturize our skin in the first place, but vitamin E is integral at repairing that barrier. Some other things, I actually ran across this one and I want to chase this one down because I'd never thought about it before, but glutathione has actually been found to be lacking in people who are more prone to acne. And I think it's probably because it's recycling that vitamin C and vitamin E
Hmm.
and making sure that the vitamin C level is very high. Vitamin C is integral in healing the skin. So I think addressing these from the inside and from the outside is very important. But you have to kind of play with the form of the ingredient that you're working with and the application of it. Like vitamin C can be inflammatory if you have like the L-ascorbic acid form, but if you have the fat soluble forms of vitamin E, it can be a lot, or a vitamin C, I mean, fat soluble form of vitamin C can be a lot more easy to tolerate if you're prone to sensitivities.
Okay.
So there's
So
a lot of
something
different,
like liposomal vitamin C would be better. Okay. You know,
well,
it's interesting the glutathione conversation.
I
And
really want to go chase that down. I just ran across it yesterday for the first time. I was like, oh, actually, that's a really interesting thought
yeah,
process to chase down and see if there's any more data on that. Um,
especially in clients who are like high stressed and understanding that glutathione is going to be depleted, magnesium is going to be depleted, which helps with glutathione production. So if our patients are super high stress complaining of acne, it would make sense to kind of start there versus
yeah,
something else. And you also mentioned the vitamin A and the retinol cream. So using too much of that causes dry skin. Is that because of vitamin A toxicity then?
essentially, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that's essentially the side effect that we're talking about. Um, that's a, and it's really important. Again, this is when we are talking about retinol usage topically specifically. A lot of it has to do with the receptor sites in the skin and how well they're converting from a storage form, a fat soluble form, retinol palmitate, into the more active forms, retinol, retinaldehyde, um, retinoic acid specifically is the most active form. And there's a lot of controversy in the skincare community about what is the best form to be using. My argument is always that you should be using the form that your skin tolerates the best, because you have to build the receptor sites in the skin cells to be able to perform the conversions, and the irritation, the dryness, the redness, the sensitivity, the reactiveness, that all happens when your skin is struggling to convert the active forms back to the storage forms. So you have to make sure that you're giving your skin, either you're spacing out that dosage often enough when you're applying it topically that your skin is having time to convert all of that stuff, as opposed to, I mean, it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. You want to let your skin be able to convert it more easily than trying to get it to like do all of the work at one time. That's when you get irritation, and that's when you start getting increased reactivity. And also all of that is inflammation. So you're actually can be making the problem worse.
So, I do genetic testing in my office, and one of the markers that they look at is for vitamin A deficiency. And so if you have this genetic SNP, there's one of 5 markers associated with vitamin A deficiency, and those people should consider retinol palmitate supplementation.
Interesting.
Yeah, yeah. That's super.
That's really interesting.
So I'm looking at my notes here from my genetics. So when most people think about increasing their vitamin A levels, they typically reach for like a carrot or an orange colored vegetable. However, this is a carotenoid, not a retinoid or retinol. So our bodies have to convert carotenoids into retinoids by an enzyme called BCMO1. Some people have issues with this enzyme in particular, and that it slows down their ability to form retinol from beta carotene. So doing a test that checks for these different variations may be something to consider. So low vitamin A symptoms are associated with vision issues, infertility, mood disorders, skin problems, thyroid dysfunction, growth delays, and infections, whereas high vitamin A symptoms are actually hair loss, liver damage, mental confusion. Kind of cool. And then I was thinking also about other nutrients, myself being that my expertise is really in gut health. And so when I think about gut health and how we can support and balance the microbiome and inflammation, I'm thinking about probiotics,
Mhm.
yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi. If we're thinking about food, there's also supplements, but that may also play a role in our skin health. Are there probiotic studies on like topical microbiome support?
Topical probiotics.
Yeah. Is that something you've ever
So
discussed?
yeah, I mean, I've this is also emerging data right now. I'm actually not a fan of it. Just I'm not a fan of the current iterations. Let's put it that way. I'm not saying that we can't get to the point where we are able to apply topical probiotics, but I think right now the most effective way to influence the topical skin microbiome is one, by not disrupting it, which is what we're talking about when we're talking about overuse of acne products like benzoyl peroxide, salicylic acid, over exfoliating, over drying with your cleansing, not allowing it to have a protective lipid layer. Those are all ways that those seem to be right now the most effective ways to protect your microbiome. I have not seen anybody talk to me about a product that you could apply topically where they've actually stabilized that probiotic. And the other thing that we don't really know, that I haven't seen any data on yet, I mean, people have tried, but I haven't seen it, is we don't know what a good microbiome looks like for the skin.
Right. I mean,
So
that,
the
right.
thing is actually another little tidbit I ran across in a study a few weeks ago that I was looking at is that the proliferation of a particular bacteria on the surface of the skin can cause acne, and not enough of it can cause rosacea. So, I mean, we really don't know what a good microbiome balance looks like. It really does seem to be dependent on the skin condition that you have cropping up. I think it's very personal. So, for me, the best way to support your skin microbiome is always going to be to support the gut microbiome, because the gut microbiome will influence the levels of the skin microbiome.
I think you answered that perfectly, and you're so right. We don't know exactly what a healthy gut microbiome looks like either, and there is this delicate dance between things that are too high and too low and what those associations are with various conditions. So, I think treat from the inside out when it comes to probiotics and prebiotics. And I always tell people prebiotics are your fibers. Those are like the fertilizer, and we lay those down and then we throw in the seed, which is the probiotic. And that should help, balance things. You don't want things too low, you don't want things too high. We want a healthy, happy ecosystem. And if you have a healthy, balanced gut, you should be able to manage your inflammation a lot better. Um, what about water? Water and the skin hydration.
Oh, controversial opinion.
I love it.
uh, Water is important for a lot of things, but you cannot hydrate your skin from the inside by drinking more water. You can't do it.
So
Usually,
why do we talk about dry skin as a marker for hydration status so often?
good question. No, the actually about the ceramides and the lipids in the skin because you need to be able to hold on to the water. So what actually happens is it's called TEWL, TEWL, transepidermal water loss. That's one of the markers that we do look for, but it's more about the skin being able to maintain the water content as opposed to being able to drink enough. If you think about it, if you are in the desert and you are just pouring water out, it's going to evaporate very quickly. You need to have something, you need to have that water in something so that it doesn't evaporate. And that's basically what we're talking about. This is again why the lipid barrier is so important in skin health is you have to have that protective layer so that the water can stay on the inside. But like I said, I'm not saying that water isn't an important part of health. You do need to make sure that you're hydrated. You do need to make sure the skin does need water. It's just mostly coming from the inside, and it's maintaining the water content that you have as opposed to drinking enough to hydrate the skin. Like I have measured it. I have gotten those little hydration machines and I've tried to drink enough water and it doesn't work if your skin if
How
your skin is dry.
interesting. Okay. So let's talk about an acne diet or skin diet. I mean, we're mostly talking about acne here. We'll have to have you back to kind of go down like the psoriasis and eczema talks. But in the interest of acne, is there any diet in particular? You know, we touched on dairy and food sensitivities, high glycemic foods, but what are your dietary recommendations for people struggling with acne?
Well, first I always do look to eliminate dairy first. Like that's usually my go-to. I try not to get people to eliminate too many foods at one time, just because I mean for your mental health as much as anything, because it's very stressful to try and eliminate these things. Um, I do think that you need to go off of dairy. I would love to see more people play with a gut healing protocol afterwards, as opposed and see if you can reintroduce it. Um, I think that you do end up looking like just a classic healthy dairy-free diet is usually the first place to go in terms of like plenty of vegetables, plenty of phytonutrients. I think you really need good protein. Protein is a building block for the skin, so you need that protein in order to be able to support the skin. Um, and the thing that I think people always shy away from is the healthy fats. This goes back to the lipid barrier and the lipid content of the skin. Like you really have to have the fats and the ceramides, the omega 3s. Not only are those things going to be anti-inflammatory, but it also helps to maintain that lipid content of the skin that's so important for skin health. Um, so yeah, I mean, I would love to see people if they're looking to control their acne with their diet. First, go dairy free, see how you do, focus on the foods that you're adding back in. You might want to try a full elimination diet. I would recommend doing that with support from somebody simply because it is very stressful. I don't believe in long-term eliminations. I think that you should eliminate things and reintroduce. At the end of the day, I want you to have the most robust diet possible, but eliminating those food sensitivities is really important because you want to make sure that you're getting rid of all inflammatory triggers. Um, Focus on healthy fats, focus on anti-inflammatory foods, focus on protein, and a diverse palette of vegetables that are going to help to support the gut microbiome.
Right. I always tell people try to make your plate as colorful as possible, and variety is the spice of life. Like there are so many different nutrients that we get from so many of these different foods that we want to make sure we're kind of hitting all of these different food groups. We want antioxidants because those are going to help control inflammation, oxidative stress. which can contribute to acne. So things like your fruits and your vegetables, think like berries, cherries, oranges, grapes, leafy greens, carrots, and bell peppers. I love your talk about fats. And I think it's important to differentiate between, unhealthy saturated fats, animal fats, and what we're talking about is more like your nuts, your seeds, your avocados, um, omega-3 fatty acids, which are going to come from and are anti-inflammatory, from fatty fish like salmon and mackerel, your nuts, your seeds like flax and walnuts. I love that you mentioned protein. Protein is like the cornerstone in maintaining weight, energy, healing, tissue repair, skin health, things like that. And so protein is going to come from poultry and fish, but also from your beans, your legumes, tofu, things like that. Um, Zinc, you had mentioned earlier, zinc. So we find that in meat, ironically, some dairy products, but nuts and whole grains. I think that's where we could spend our focus. I'm thinking very Mediterranean diet is very anti-inflammatory and very fitting here.
Well, we have, I mean, the Mediterranean diet is a gold standard for so many different conditions for a reason, because it does net out that anti inflammatory response. It does net out a healthy protein balance. It does net out with good omega 3s, the healthy fatty acids, and things like that. And I think it's also important to remember, like, there is a lot you can do with diet, but you might need to integrate some supplemental help. I think taking a probiotic can be really helpful if you're going through a gut repair. I think maybe taking some additional B vitamins can be really helpful as well, especially if you're not used to consuming a lot of protein, that you can get those B vitamins out, or if you have any sort of dysbiosis and you can't break apart those B vitamins out of the protein sources, or if you can't break out the amino acids from the protein sources, if you're having trouble digesting food. I'm actually someone, in fact, one of the things that got me down this path, this whole nutrition path in the first place, was noticing that healthy foods tended to make me sicker for a period of time. And it was because the vegetables are hard to digest and the proteins are hard to digest. Healthy fats can be hard to digest if you have a level of dysbiosis. So you might find that digestive enzymes are really helpful when you're introducing a lot of these foods. It was a thing that, because this was also 10 years ago, like before we knew that this was happening, like all of the different layers of this, we used to joke that I was allergic to everything healthy because everything healthy made me
Right, and I think people will come to me and they're like, "I can't eat this, I can't eat that, I can't do this," and then they have, like, this huge restriction or their diet is just anything far from balance. I almost said normal, but normal is very different for everybody. And to me, I always look at those people, I'm like, "Well, why? What is going on that you cannot digest and break down these foods that we should be able to break down, whether it's a fat, a leafy green, or a protein? Like, what's going on with your acid? What's going on with the bacteria and the enzymes?" So, this is where if you're struggling with that and you're struggling with acne or one or the other, like, you really need to get with somebody who can go down that rabbit hole and understand like the root cause. And that may be the difference instead of going to somebody who's just going to prescribe something topical to address the, symptom. We want to address the root cause.
I say all the time that if acne could be cured with topical products, we wouldn't have to deal with it at this point. The reason that we have to go to diet is because the topical products aren't cutting it. And it's because it's an internal problem. It's an internal problem. Like, there's a reason why so many of the acne studies that exist are on different prescription products. Benzoyl peroxide, tretinoin, um, any sort of any other sort of, topical antibiotic, which again is disrupting your skin microbiome.
Yeah, I think
So
we just have to figure out that balance, especially with the day and age that we live with fast food and like dining out. And it's just figuring out that delicate balance of, how often can we eat out and these types of foods? How often should we be cooking at home, eating more balanced and supporting the microbiome and all of that. But, I really want to round out this conversation by talking about your recommended skincare routine. for people with acne or just in general to prevent acne? Like, what do you recommend for cleansing, exfoliation, moisture? You mentioned sunscreen earlier. Let's dive into that conversation.
So mild breakouts can almost 90% of the time be fixed with just balancing your exfoliation. So let's start there because that is the easiest thing. Well, I say it's the easiest thing, but it's also sometimes the trickiest thing because finding a good exfoliant on the market can be really, really tricky. If you are breaking out, I generally like, actually for everybody, but if you're breaking out especially, I generally like a balance of beta hydroxy acids and alpha hydroxy acids. So beta hydroxy acids are your salicylic acid. They work on the interior of the pore. Alpha hydroxy acids are like your glycolic, your lactic, malic, mandelic, things like that. Basically, everything else is an alpha hydroxy acid. They work by exfoliating the surface of the skin. 9 times out of 10, if I can get somebody exfoliating better, minor breakouts will come under control very quickly. A lot of times it is just the exfoliation issue. You can get that in a mask. Depending on the strength of these products, you can get it in a mask, you can get it in a serum. I would try with it a couple times a week, see how your skin does. If you notice redness or flaking or irritation, then you should dial back your usage. If you notice that it's not going away, you might need to dial up your usage, depending on what the type of product is. Good moisture is always key, but that's very particular to like your skin type. I will also say that, again, I live in the Northeast, so 90% of my clients are dry as a bone and they're not moisturizing enough. So we see that lipid barrier problem come into context. Even oilier skins might find that they want to moisturize, but they just need like more of a gel moisturizer. So something that's very lightweight, but will still help to protect the layers of the skin, maintain that lipid barrier. Sunscreens, I love a mineral sunscreen, but that's not to say that the chemical filters are bad. You should use a sunscreen that works best for you. I just find that people generally have better luck, especially if their skin has some sort of inflammatory reaction going on. I generally like a mineral sunscreen that's titanium dioxide and zinc oxide. They can be hard to find in good formulations, though, simply because they tend to be a little bit thicker, so they're harder to formulate. They can also go ashy, which is why I say I'm not against chemical sunscreens. For any reason, you should find the sunscreen that you can use. Also, quick sidebar, the sun does not help your acne. It will help to dry it out. I get this a lot. You cannot go out into the sun with acne and without a sunscreen. You will end up with pigmentation. Okay, so let's just, you gotta wear a sunscreen. Yes, you can go out in the sun, wear your sunscreen. Don't go into the sun to dry out your acne. I don't recommend that. Cleansing, your skin should not feel stripped. It should not feel very dry afterwards. I don't force people to do double cleanses. It's not necessarily a thing that I'm a huge fan of. That said, I do love an oil cleanse because it breaks everything down faster, and then you just do a regular cleanser on top of it. But more than anything, if you're wearing makeup, you need something that's getting rid of the makeup. If you are not wearing makeup, you still need something that's going to leave your skin feeling comfortable afterwards with just making sure that your skin is clean but not stripped, because that stripped feeling is your microbiome being disrupted.
And that's often what we see with recommendations from professionals, medical or otherwise, is that they can be overly aggressive and people bounce from one extreme to the other and they still have acne.
Yep. You really do have to play with the balance of some of those products, especially if you're dealing with, if you have a prescription strength or even an over-the-counter retinoid. I'm obviously a big fan of retinoids. I should have mentioned that. But I believe that they're super helpful. They're great for anti-aging and for anti-acne. So it's a great way if you have breakouts and wrinkles that you want to fix both of those. A retinoid is a great thing to start. In fact, I generally recommend some form of vitamin A if you're 35 plus, but really 30 plus if you want to not ever age. start with it when you're, but you only want to use those kind of things every couple of nights. It really, you always want to be paying attention to the messages that your skin is sending you. If it feels stripped, if it feels dry, if it's more reactive, if you're pink across the cheeks, you want to look at your routine. Where's my exfoliant? Where's my retinoid? And can I dial those back?
I mean, it sounds like what I do on a day-to-day basis with the gut and just your body in general. Your skin's no different. It's a delicate dance. Some days you're going to need something more harsh, and some days you're going to need something more gentle. And yeah, that's one of the things that I do is I rotate these products every few days based off of what my skin's looking like and what I'm feeling. So I love this conversation. Next time we'll have you back and we'll have you talk about, I already think we need to talk about autoimmune. And then I think we need to have another one on aging because I need to know those secrets. I've been using like anti-aging cream since I was like 19. It was preventative. um,
We should definitely plan to do autoimmune because my master's thesis was on psoriasis and gluten consumption. So, and it was all about autoimmune. And that's really where I think a lot of using the skin as a window can be very integral, just because you can really stop that chain reaction. There's so many things that you can control if you pay attention to the skin.
right. We just have to learn to be more intuitive with our bodies. And I think those messages can be very confusing, but with practice and working with a professional, whether you're trying to address your gut intuition or your skin intuition, can be really helpful to learn those things. So, well, thank you so much for this conversation. I have learned so much just in talking to you in this hour. And I want to conclude this by reminding everybody that it's important to note that while improving gut health may help some individuals with their acne, it may not be a standalone solution and should be combined with other acne management strategies that we've discussed here today. We talked about skincare routine, we've talked about diets, we talked about topicals, we talked about nutrients. So I think at the end of the day, it's really important that you match yourself with a esthetician or a professional who is well versed in all of these things to help you identify what your specific needs are. Um, Anything you want to add here, Shannon?
Yeah, actually I do. I think a lot of people look at it as an either or solution, either dermatologist or an esthetician. And I think there's a lot of room for conversation about how an esthetician can work with a dermatologist and how an esthetician can help you put together the rest of your routine, or an esthetician who's also a nutritionist like myself, how we can help you build a routine around your prescription products. At the end of the day, it's important to remember estheticians cannot alter the recommendations of your dermatologist, but I can help you manage around what the dermatologist is recommending. And it doesn't have to be an either or solution. If you're working with an esthetician who is well versed in situations and skin conditions, she should be able to help you build a routine between the two of you. Like, it's a partnership.
It's a collaboration, right? At the end of the day, whether you have a cardiologist, a gastroenterologist, a dermatologist, an esthetician, and a nutritionist, it's a collaborative effort to help you feel and look the best and optimize your health at the end of the day.
Right, right. And I mean, without opening a can of worms, we didn't even touch on how much an acne problem can stress you out and how much it can affect your self-esteem, and that if you are suffering with that there is help out there and there are people who are willing to help you. So
I love it. Okay. Well, thank you so much again for joining me today. And I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the future.
Same.
Thank you for listening to the Sky Therapeutics podcast with your host, that's me, Tara Torres. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to check out any bonus info and links in the show notes. You can visit us at www.skytherapeutic.com or find us on social media because we love connecting with our audience. Until next time, be well.